Okay, guys, I think we're going to start. Hello, my name's Lucy Siegel, and I'm very honoured to be hosting this chat today for Plastic Overshoot Day. Obviously, we are here, and you might have already seen it because we have this brilliant report to talk about. There you go. I know I printed it out. I'm sorry, that's not very environmentally friendly, but I wanted to really read every sentence. So this report is a rare thing, in my opinion. It's got something for everyone. It's got something for citizens, activists, NGOs, policymakers, and we have a lot to talk about. So I'm not going to hang around too much. I'm going to tell you who we're going to hear from today, and hopefully you can see our brilliant panelists. We're very, very lucky in that we actually have one of the report's authors here, which I always love because we can really squeeze the juice out of this report today. So we're joined by Sarah Perriard, who's co-CEO of Earth Action and Plastic Overshoot Day. And she's the stakeholder engagement lead, i.e. she's one of the big brains and drive behind Plastic Overshoot Day. So welcome, Sarah. We're going to hear from you in a second. Let me tell you who we're also going to hear from. We have Lakshmi Menon, who is here, who will give us a wave when I say your name, who's Head of Impact at Clean Hub. Welcome to you, joining us from India. We've got John Duncan, who's Global Initiative Lead, No Plastics in Nature, WWF, who's joining us from Cape Town. We have Sharona Schneider, who's founder of Tuesday for Trash, and of course, as you will know, a National Geographic Young Explorer. Hello to you, joining us from Tel Aviv. We have Icha Marta Muslin, who's National Coordinator for Indonesian Waste Platform, and she's joining us from Indonesia. Hello to you. We have Joe Morley from City to Sea, Head of Marketing and Campaigns, who's joining us from Cornwall in the southwest of the United Kingdom. And we have Jacob Johnson Atakpa, who is Project Coordinator, Zero Waste Accra at Green Africa Youth Organisation, who's joining us from Accra in Ghana. Hello to you. Oh, what a brilliant panel. So yeah, you don't need to hear much from me when we've got these amazing, amazing people. So I think we're going to launch straight into it. Remember, the hashtag, you've got to have a hashtag, I insist, is Plastic Overshoot Day, not surprisingly. All of this is being recorded, so you will be able to access it afterwards, the whole webinar. We'd love some questions, and we'll try and squeeze those in at the end. So get those in on the chat box. You can do those at any point, and we'll come to them at the end. Are we ready? Let's go. This is going to be a very dynamic hour, I can tell you. Okay, so Sarah, we're going to come to you for a lovely overview. Tell us, what is Plastic Overshoot Day, please?
Sure. So Plastic Overshoot Day is the day after which humanity has used all of the capacity that is available for the whole year to manage plastic waste. So it means that today is the Plastic Overshoot Day. Between today and December 31st, all of the short-life plastic that is consumed in the world will end up in nature, and a part of that will find its way to the oceans. And so for 2023, it means that we have 157 days of plastic overshoot, and each of the countries basically participate in a different way to that. The way that they participate depends on their size, on the consumption per person, etc. So we have tried to really give a lot of different ways of looking at this issue from the Plastic Overshoot Day report at the country level.
Okay, so it's incredibly interesting, but what does the overshoot tell us? It basically speaks to a massive imbalance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So that's really basically the difference between the capacity available for treating plastic waste and what we put on the market. And currently, 43% of the waste that we produce cannot be treated. And so that basically shows that we either need to reduce the amount of plastic that is consumed, and also that we need to increase the capacity to deal with it. It also shows that there are massive imbalances in terms of geographies. We have looked at each of the countries from what they produce, what they use, but also what they export. And what we see is that a lot of the overshoot is created actually due to exports from mostly global north countries to global south countries who have difficulty dealing with their own waste, and on top of that are absorbing more of this. So one thing that was really key for us is that we were not shaming the countries who cannot manage their waste. And so when a country exports some waste in another country to deal with it, if this waste is not treated, this is reflected in the exporting countries, not in the importing countries, like what we used to look at a few years back when the first data were emerging. And that was really key for us to really show what are the big contributors to this crisis, not those that are treating it, but those that are actually creating it.
Okay, I think it's really important that you say that, you know, it's not the purpose of the report to shame people. It is a very constructive report. So you can read it from whichever country you're from. And what should you be sort of taking away with it? What would you expect people to do with this information?
Yeah, so we designed that really to empower either individuals, organizations, countries themselves to understand the situation, because there's so many data there, but we wanted something that was comparable so that people really have the different metrics in mind to take actions that are proper to their own country. And we have designed 10 different archetypes of countries based on those very unique situations, so that countries can then look at what they should be doing based on what's happening in their country and can really act for that. So it's about awareness. We would love everyone to understand where they live and what is the situation so that they can change, but also so that they can support organizations who are on the ground, and so that those organizations who are working in advocacy or underground projects have in hand the data that can let them to use it in their advocacy and decision making.
Okay, thank you so much. So if you have any questions, especially about how to use the report and how it works, put those in the chat. We'll come back to Sarah at the end if we have time. Okay, thank you so much. That's a very clear overview, brilliantly concise, because it's quite a big report. So let's get some context for the report now. So we know, or many of you will know, that a global plastic treaty is now in negotiation. So this opens momentum, or gives us momentum to solve the issue at its root. Now, WWF, because we're next going to go to John Duncan, together with EMF, have been a strong voice. They've been pushing for such negotiations to happen in the first place, and a legally binding instrument to be created. So let's just check in on where we are with that global treaty to solve the plastic pollution crisis. Why do we need it? What is the Business Coalition for a Global Plastic Treaty? And what are its key objectives and expectations? Big questions, but there's no better person to answer this than John. So welcome to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Much appreciated. I'll do my best. I mean, I think, you know, as this Overshoot report highlights, the plastic pollution really is a global problem, and you can see the fact that we've arrived at Plastic Overshoot Day just over halfway through the year. You know, the scale of the problem is massive. We are producing almost twice as much waste as we can manage at a global level, and obviously that burden is also felt unequally across the different countries around the world. And I think that's really important to highlight. You know, that it isn't something that any country can solve on its own. And that's why a treaty is such an important mechanism. It's how really countries come together and agree on a set of rules that they can help manage this collective problem collectively. And I think if you just look at a bit more of the background, what we've seen over the last couple of decades is more and more national regulations, more and more voluntary initiatives trying to address the plastic pollution problem, at the same time as plastic pollution has continued to grow exponentially. So it's very clear that those are not the solution to the problem. We need something where we all act together. There are some voluntary initiatives which have found a few things that are working or are pulling the initial kind of strings of solutions out there in terms of some of the reuse and refill and some of those really exciting things out there, but they're never going to be able to scale without a global regulatory framework, which actually supports them across all of the different places in which these plastic products are being used. What we've also seen is, we've got historically a lot of regulations which are very misaligned. So you've got one country which is regulating in this direction and another country which is regulating in exactly the opposite direction. One country banning, one country promoting recycling of the same product. It's very complex, and ultimately you end up with lots of products which end up on the wrong market, where they can either they are banned or they can't be recycled, and the infrastructure doesn't match what is needed. So the last point I think I also wanted to highlight is that there isn't currently a coordinated approach to tackling some of these challenges. So both in terms of understanding, and I think this report goes a long way to helping us understand what the bigger kind of data problems are, where are the biggest problems. But then, what do we do about it collectively? Again, we've got many different governments who are investing in different approaches and businesses who are investing in different approaches, but really they're all going in different directions. You need to have one agreed upon approach in order to have impact. So I think that's why a treaty is so important. And I think what's really exciting is that a strong, ambitious treaty with global rules where everyone has to behave in the same way and all the countries need to implement the same rules actually makes business sense. So it actually supports businesses doing business effectively. And that's because having these harmonized regulations enables companies to not have to produce 500 different versions of the same product. They can produce the same one, operate in multiple different markets because it meets these harmonized regulations. So you simplify the complexity of these businesses. It also gives companies this long-term policy certainty. So you know what you should be investing in as a company, what materials and what types of products you should be investing in and what you shouldn't be investing in, because there are products out there which we want to see eliminated because they are very difficult to recycle or have health concerns associated with them. So there are some products which actually we just don't want on the market anyway. And those are often the products which particularly the developing world is poorly equipped to manage. And then lastly, I think the idea of simplifying the process of reporting as well is also much easier. You've got a lot of different companies sitting with different reporting frameworks which they have to deal with, and having one standardized approach to that makes a massive difference. So I think looking at all of these opportunities for a global treaty is where WWF and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation brought together a number of leading businesses from around the world to form what is the Business Coalition. This is a group of over 130 companies now who are calling for an ambitious treaty which actually helps to drive reduction of plastic production, circulation of the products that we do need, and then remediation and prevention of those really hard to abate macro and microplastics. So it's super exciting to have companies now actually starting to ask governments for regulation as opposed to pushing back against regulation. And these are the kind of companies, hopefully, who will be leading the charge in terms of implementing the global treaty once it is done. So I hope I've answered your questions.
You did. I didn't know if you were going to get to the Business Coalition, but you got to it brilliantly, all very concise. I just have one question for you because, what's in it for businesses? Like, a lot of people would say, well, letting businesses steer this, like, why would they do that when surely they can make more money with business as usual? So what do you find is the driving factor for businesses to get involved in this and show leadership on it?
Well, I think important to highlight that it's not just businesses. So organizations like WWF have been very actively engaged in advocacy from a civil society perspective, and there are many organizations on this call, I'm sure, who also engage in that advocacy process. I think the important point is that where you have civil society and businesses aligning and actually saying we all want to see this, it sends a really strong message to governments that yes, we want a strong and ambitious treaty. We don't just want a piece of paper which says we'll think about doing something. It says we want rules, we want global regulation. And I think that the motivation for many of these companies, as I highlight, I think there is a strong business case for them to participate, but perhaps importantly, many of these companies have made public commitments to saying that they're going to reach certain recyclability targets and all of that, and they've realized that the system as it stands is locked into a linear cycle, and that they can't meet these commitments to kind of recycled content or recyclability or reuse without an enabling policy framework, particularly in a competitive environment. So they can do a little bit. If their competitors are not being expected to do the same, then at the end of the day, it's just not going to work, and their shareholders will pull them back and say, don't invest in those ideas. But if there's, a requirement that all companies meet a certain level of kind of reuse or refill or recycled content, then suddenly it becomes, business does what it can do best and actually figures out how to optimize the opportunities related to that policy framework.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Thank you. Now, you mentioned bans, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. And we're going to go to Ica Mata Muslin in Indonesia. So we're talking about the treaty may speed up the implementation by governments on bans and problem plastics. Earlier on, some business voices, for example, elevated against the risk to eliminate what you might call high leaking plastic formats like shampoo sachets. They're the obvious example, as they enable poor communities at the bottom of the pyramid to access essential supplies. Now, you are very sort of expert at tackling this. Can you tell us more about the solutions? How do you avoid negative social consequences of certain bans?
Thank you. Where I live now is represent like 50% of the Indonesian, because I'm living in the archipelago where we are spreading on the more than 17,000 islands. So I think it's the imagination of the businesses that when they are talking about the rights of the poor to access some supplies. If they are not available in the market, then people have no choice. Like they can purchase things like once a month or once a week. I mean, where I work now, it's a very poor community where some people only earn like £30 a month. So this kind of people represent many poor communities around the globe. And when we start to try to provide like refilling station there, it works. So it means if this kind of refilling is working, and then the businesses can just change their system to reusable package. I think when it's not in the market, then people have no choice, including these poor communities. Because where I live, we are so far from the recycling companies in the eastern part of Indonesia, and it takes like 2 days to reach the nearest recycling companies. And 80% of the plastic end up in the environment. And in Indonesia, not many provinces has the facility to have the proper landfill. So it's end up in the environment. So I think it need to pressure the businesses that it will work. If it's not available in the market, then people will change their pattern of shopping. So it can still accessible to everybody.
Great, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about refill models that you have, that are in your communities that you work with? What sort of products are available as refills, and how long does it take people to start using refills? What is what do they think of them? Like how has it given people business opportunities? Could you explain a little bit more about what that's like for people?
Yeah, we ran this project for 6 months last year, and we cannot continue because the geographically challenge we are so far, and then the companies doesn't produce things in the big container, so it's quite hard. But when we run the project for 6 months, the demand of the community to the product, refilling product like shampoo, detergents, oil, and then cleaning stuff, it's quite high. So I think people start to understand that, because if you refill, the price is lower. So it's also good for the poor communities, and they are very excited with the program. The reason we cannot continue is just to ship the things from Java. It's so far away, so the challenge make it quite difficult to continue the program. But if it's the program will be running by the government, they have all the resources to bring these big supplies to the rural and remote community. I think it's gonna work.
It's such a shame. It's like so heartbreaking if the program has to stop because. Yeah. There's not the money to pay to bring it from Java, or there's not the suppliers are not making the bulk products. So tell us what you need. What can we do? Because we all feel really strongly about this. Who do we write to?
The companies. Make
Okay.
make those the bulk of product available for the remote region because the community love it. They pay less by do the refilling things.
Okay, everybody, we need to listen to each other. The community love it. We need to keep this going. So we need to work out, stay in touch at the end of this, and we need to work out how to help you to make this happen, because we can't afford to lose these schemes. I'm guessing they're really, really important to make the plastic treaty work, obviously. Okay, thank you so much, Ita. Well, we'll come back to you, I'm sure, with some questions. And people may have thoughts on how they can help, which would be great as well. Okay, so we've heard from our experts about how this is playing out in communities, a plastic treaty, and we're starting to get a sense of how this report will fit in and how we'll be able to use it. So let's now hear four voices and perspectives. And we're going to move on now to looking at the role of civil society. What role does civil society play in the system change needed to fully address this crisis of plastic pollution? I know we've already got people in the chat box asking, what can individuals do? Let's talk about what civil society can do. I'm very, very excited to hear these stories. We're going to go first to you, Sharona Schneider. What are the right strategies or approaches to inspire people to take action against plastic pollution? And how does Tuesday for Trash contribute to these efforts? I guess you've learned a lot. You've tried things they haven't worked. You've tried things they have worked. So give us some of your insight.
Yeah, I would say, so we began the movement in 2020 during the COVID lockdowns as a simple way to get back outside, do something positive for the environment. And what we realized is that people are really looking for an invitation and something that is really simple and easy that can be implemented into their daily routines, that allows them to build community in the places where they live and they interact with on a daily basis. And the movement encourages people to dedicate time weekly to cleaning up their local environment. And in that sense, we start to introduce people to the reality of what the problem is, which is that the garbage crisis is something we often ignore. However, it's a problem that we're seeing all over the world, everywhere you go. And oftentimes the garbage that is polluting our environment is plastic. And so what we've been able to do is really create a simple and easy activity that gets you to sort of start reconnecting with the nature that's around you and recognizing that your backyard isn't just, you know, what's immediately outside your door. It's our entire planet, it's our home, and being able to find agency and mobilization around that. And what started as just me and a friend picking up trash at our university 3 years ago has turned into people in 40 plus countries that are participating in over 37,000 pounds of trash that's been removed. And oftentimes this trash is in marginalized neighborhoods or in ecosystems that are really fragile, and any piece of litter or trash, especially when it's plastic, creates a lot of harm to these different actors and individuals living in these areas. And what we've really learned is that you have to start small, but even though a lot of the times experts and generally the public look down upon emphasizing individual actions as a way to solve this problem, because of course the manufacturers and the big industries are the ones that at the end of the day are creating the foundational problem. But you'd be really surprised how much we can scale change when we all come together and decide that this is something that should be prioritized and we should start, even if it's small, taking action. And we've seen, especially in the chapter in Israel that we have, a lot of really drastic changes happening. The places that we've been cleaning for the past 2 years are actually staying clean, because usually when people see an area that is less dirty or not littered, they feel more guilty adding trash or littering those areas. So it's actually increasing positive social behavioral changes. And now we're able to focus on policy and government and actual waste management practices that will hold more responsibility for the people and manufacturers creating the problem. And we're working on a new proposal for the region that can be scaled in the larger Middle Eastern area. So it's really cool, I think, to see that once you actually start on a ground level and aim to build upwards and involve the people that often don't have their voices heard or don't feel like they can have a positive difference or don't know how to weaponize their voices yet, it creates a lot of change.
Yeah, and so quickly. I mean, you know, to start from two of you to scale like that is really quite incredible. I commend you for that. It's amazing. This report, Plastic Overshoot Day, can you see any way that you will be using it, or maybe you haven't thought about that yet? But
Definitely, because it's really hard to pass legislation when it comes to plastic because of all the lobby groups behind it. I think something that should be more talked about is the history of plastic, because people don't really realize that plastic was once a super versatile, durable material that people used consistently and repeatedly all the time before there were these marketing campaigns that taught people how to throw away their plastic and to treat it as a single-use item. Because like if we're facing reality, plastic is used in a lot of really essential things in our society, whether it's in medical equipment or things like that. And currently we don't have the mechanisms to switch that like very quickly. Obviously, it's something we can work towards, and I think we should work towards. But I think what's really important is to understand that like this is something that has a lot of viability in terms of the society we have, but what we really need to do is start choosing and subsidizing alternatives, using this report to show that there is a problem. Like the coast of Israel is the most polluted in the entire Mediterranean from plastic, and plastic is made of oil, it's carcinogenous, it's not good for our health or the ecosystem. So definitely this will be able to support on a more legislative and policy level.
yeah, such an important point you make about the history. We were taught to view it as a disposable material and how to dispose of it in, you know, out of sight, out of mind, because there is no way. Thank you very much. A lot of very important points there. And yeah, we will come back to you as well. Thank you, Sharona. Okay, so we're going to go now to Lakshmi Menon and talk a little bit about Clean Hub. So with Clean Hub, you're working closely with your local community. Would you like to introduce Clean Hub to us? Tell us a bit more about it. And do you see a genuine investment and willingness to change among local communities when it comes to addressing plastic pollution? Because obviously it's such a huge issue.
Yep.
Yeah, are they ready to go?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll take both of your questions separately. About Clean Hub, we are focusing on trying to reduce plastic waste entering the ocean. So we work in coastal regions. And one of the biggest challenges that we see is in most of these coastal regions, there's no access to collection of plastic. And I think the multiple of these points seem a little repetitive. So there's no access to collection of plastic, and there's also no access to processing of it. So because of which it kind of gets left behind. And that's the big challenge that we need to address. If we have to address this challenge, then the best way to do is improve the waste management processes that is happening in these coastal regions. And that's where we are focusing on. And Clean Hub works with waste management organizations who are operating in coastal regions so that we can improve their process and support them. We have also created a software platform which helps to track the waste right from the collection point through the different stages of waste management till the end processing. And that helps in two ways. One, it helps to bring in some financial support through plastic credits and that kind of avenues. And the second is also because these are remote projects, you also need ways in which you can monitor all of these projects and see how you can implement all these processes, right? The second part of your question about the community, yes, no community wants to live next to waste. They don't want to throw away waste into their nature or burn it. So one of the points that was talked about history of plastic, if you look at a country like India or Indonesia, historically, we would not throw away that much of waste, even if it was like food waste, that was what was being thrown away. And things like metal or anything else would be given away for recycling. You don't just throw away, there's revenue in it. And plastic was like saved and not really like thrown off into the nature. But now, because the quality of the plastic itself has reduced and we have so much of low quality plastic that we use every day, there is no point in keeping it and reusing it. So you end up disposing of it. But the community does not want to do it. And what we have seen in our programs is that if there is a reliable solution that is also considerate to their living needs, like we can't have a very grand solution like how you would have in a city. In a small village, you need to be mindful of what's their need. Then they're absolutely coming forward and coming together, and it's a whole community effort when it comes to a solution like that.
It's such another amazing point. So the quality of the plastic, like, that's fascinating to me. So is it the thickness of the plastic, or is it the form of it? So it used to come in a tub with a lid, and now it comes with it, like, what do you mean by quality of the plastic?
So it is, one is the thickness. The second is that there is these multi-layer packaging that is used for larger shelf lives of things. Then the other thing is, like one of the points that was mentioned earlier, sachets of oil or smaller packaging, so that you can get access to like small quantities. So that just increases the plastic that comes in packaging itself. And a lot of thinner plastic that is used as liners, that is used as carry bags, that still is prevalent in a lot of places, though, I mean, there are bans, but it's not implemented. And that's the reason it's still available in the market.
Okay, thank you. And how do you think you'd be able to use the report, and how, like, an idea, a concept like Plastic Overshoot Day, how does that work for you?
So what I have seen is that it's anything like this, when you're talking about sustainability, is a journey. In the beginning, it is about just looking at it like, okay, let me just get rid of my problem, right? But just after that, after about 6-8 months of doing this, they next want to do, okay, what's the better way of doing this? They want to understand about this whole recycling. And there is a definite need for them to understand a global perspective. Like, for example, we work in coastal villages, and they are mostly fishing community people, and they don't see as much of plastic in their in the ocean, because in the ocean it's like very large. So when they are seeing, it's like little bit of plastic. But when you actually explain and bring in the awareness of the scale of the problem, they really want to solve it, and they don't want to be the people who are contributing to it, because they are first affected by anything that affects the ocean. So they understand it, but they need to understand the scale of it as well. So something like this will help us give it that necessary importance, and not just like, okay, I just feel personally you should not use plastic. Has that difference in the way we explain. Yeah.
Just very quickly on that point,
Yes.
do people get angry because they start to understand how plastic is being dumped on their community from outside?
So there is a mix. It's there is anger that why should it be only why should I do something and somebody else is not doing it? That kind of differentiation of like, if I'm keeping my neighborhood clean and then somebody else is coming and putting some waste there, obviously there's a little bit of like frustration. But when it comes to like the community working together, then you see that there's a lot of support to each other. So it's not alone. So we have to build in like a small movement, like how we also discussed some time back. When it becomes like more people are involved in it, and we make it like a problem of that, it's not an individual problem, it is a collective problem. And we have to look at it in a larger scheme of things, involve all the necessary officials, etc. Then it changes, the dialogue changes, and you start feeling more empowered.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, we'll
Yeah.
come back to you, I'm sure. So we've heard from two of our contributors with some very direct observations and practical experience of how these campaigns run. We obviously need, I think we're coming to the conclusion, true system change supported by legally binding instruments like the plastic treaty that we've talked about, cascading into national policies. And we're starting to see that citizen voice is key. Now, as consumers, there are still steps to take. And for that, we need support from businesses. And that brings us to our next two contributors. City to Sea supports circularity through reuse and makes it easy for businesses and consumers to actually live in circularity. So let's hear from Joe now. Joe, what's your takeaway from your experience at solution implementation, and what further support do you want to see from governments, industry and citizens? I think there's going to be a few things to scale up those solutions.
Thanks, Lucy. We've learned a lot over the last few years across the work that we've done working with industry. We've implemented our own reuse systems, and we've also done a lot of consumer research on the way. And I think the main things that we've learned is that it's really hard. System change is hard, and it takes time. The reality is our single-use disposable culture has been the norm for the last 50 plus years. It's cheap, it's convenient, it's efficient, and that's going to be really, really hard to move away from. The other thing we've learned is that it's really expensive for businesses or organizations that are just starting out, who are the pioneers in this space and really starting to invest in reuse systems. You're having to trial these new systems on your own. You need to invest in the infrastructure, the packaging, the washing facilities, the distribution, and then of course the marketing to reach your customers and educate them around new ways of having to shop, having to consume. But on a positive note, what we've also learned is that the public are really ready for this. You know, we want to see change. Citizens want to see change. And, you know, the reality we all know is if you're a refiller now, it's not convenient. You have to carry around, you know, you've got your backpack with your refillable bottle, your cup, your cutlery, because actually reuse systems are not accessible enough at the moment. The solutions are not in place. And for it to really work, for reuse systems to be able to operate at scale, they've got to be convenient. They've got to be as frictionless as possible. And we need to be able to explore them in the same way that we go about our usual shopping. So it needs to be in the same place, in the same aisle. It has to be in your local supermarket. We need to see much more accessibility globally, you know, and within the UK. And of course, it has to be affordable. We're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. So any changes that we make have to be cost comparative if we're going to see this shift in the market. And something we've already touched on today, we're currently lacking the political and the business will for this change to happen. We know that voluntary agreements have not been working. Here in the UK, reuse rates have actually fallen over the last couple of years, you know, from a pretty rubbish 1.9% of packaging that was currently reusable. A couple of years ago, it's fallen to just over 1%. So there's, you know, we really, really need this to happen. And the other thing that we've really learned through the work that we've been doing with industry is that for this to work at scale, we've got to see standardization of packaging and of the infrastructure. And because it's just so expensive to invest in all of these systems and packaging, and it's not going to work if there are 15 different types of bottles or containers that you get your groceries in or your health and beauty products, because those all have to be designed, they have to be distributed, they have to be collected for washing. So if we're going to see standardization, the other thing that we really need to see with industry is collaboration. If businesses can work together, they're able to share the cost, to share the risk, and also to share the learning and the innovation as well. So collaboration and standardization are really, really important. But the potential for change, if we get this right, is huge. I was just reading a World Economic Forum stat the other day that half of our annual ocean plastic waste could be completely reduced just by reusing 10% of the products that we use in single-use plastic. So the potential for change is massive. And just coming on to the second part of your question, what do we need to see from governments? Ultimately, we need to see policy change. We've talked about this already. We need to see supportive regulation that is going to shift the needle. We need businesses and industry to have a very clear direction of travel, that this is where we need to go. And that means we need to have clear reuse targets. We need this to operate, you know, on a national level, on a global level. And again, that comes into play with this need for standardization across the world. Ultimately, you know, we've seen some countries do this successfully. And it's only when we've got these businesses in place, these targets in place, that businesses will have the clarity that they need to start to actually invest and to act. So businesses need to really support with the clarity, but also with investment as well. You know, if we can get reuse targets to operate alongside things like EPR, and that money is reinvested into the infrastructure, and that's when we'll start to see scale starting to really happen. So from businesses, we need that commitment, we need investment. And from us as individuals, as consumers, we've got to keep using our voices. We've got to keep holding businesses and brands and governments to account. We've got to let them know that this is something that has got to happen, that we still ultimately care about, and that's what's going to be able to keep the pressure on to drive the change. Okay,
there's so much brilliant stuff in there. And I like the way that we switched it to the positive there. A call to arms. So that statistic that you said, I think I'm repeating this properly, but if we swapped effectively 10% of single-use plastics into reuse, you could reduce ocean pollution by a half.
That's what I've read recently in a World Economic Forum report, which is, really powerful. It just shows the potential, and because so much of ocean pollution comes from, the same offenders. It's things like plastic bottles, it's food containers, it's packaging. If we can shift just those worst the most polluting items, which, just a small shift is ultimately going to drive a big change.
Yes, I mean, that's a really big win. And in terms of the statistics that you gave us, you said that reuse packaging wasn't that high. So you said 1.9, but it's fallen to just over 1%. What is to blame for that? Is it just people getting bored by it? Is it COVID? Is it what do you think is the...
So a lot of the change that we've seen, and those statistics come from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's global commitment. So the members, the signatories of that commitment, which do represent a huge part of the market for packaging. One of the reasons it increased was that we were starting to see a lot of innovation and investment in pilots to trial reuse systems. And that's what's been fantastic is, things are changing. We are starting to see businesses shift, but the problem is, to date, it's been entirely voluntary. And as I said, the reality is it's very, very expensive. So a lot of businesses have invested in pilots to try reuse systems. It's been incredibly costly, and ultimately they can't get it to stack up financially. So a lot of those pilots have come to an end now. And a lot of big businesses and brands are in the sort of evaluation stage and working out what to do next, how to scale it, if it's ultimately not going to meet their bottom line and be able to generate income for them. And that's why we need standardization, so it's not so costly, so businesses are able to share some of that cost, share some of that risk, and enable us to scale much faster.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It sort of reminds me, and I don't know if plastic fashion waste is included in these statistics. Maybe somebody could tell me, but it reminds me of a lot of the issues around fast fashion production and environmental impact, which I've worked in very closely. There was a whole host of pilot schemes which sort of added up to a sort of decarbonisation goal and all of that sort of stuff. And when they're done and they fall away, if they haven't been embedded and turned into something else, then we know that that this drive, this momentum just starts to fall away. So I think that's a really, really important point, and a very real world point that you've made amongst many others. Thank you so much, Jo. Again, we'll come back in a second, I'm sure. And I will come back because I want to ask you about the report and how you're going to use it. But last but by no means least, we're going to speak to Jacob. Jacob is, as we established, the project coordinator for the Zero Waste Project at the Green Africa Youth Organisation. Jacob, in your experience, what are the most significant challenges faced by rural communities in Ghana when it comes to what we're talking about, waste management and plastic pollution? And how do you work to tackle these challenges?
Thank you very much, Lucy. When it comes to waste management, especially in rural areas where Gaia has projects, to say the least, the very overarching problem that we face is ineffective waste collection systems. That is to say that individuals, households just lump up all the types of waste, the plastic waste, the organic waste, the electronic waste, the residual waste, everything goes in together. That means that there is really no avenue for separation of said waste, and everything goes to a landfill. And the studies have shown that landfills are the third highest emitters of methane. further compounding the climate crisis. And so that is one problem. The second one is the improper disposal of waste. And so in many communities, rural communities where there is no structured waste system, waste collection and management system, people resort to open burning of waste and dumping in drainage systems. So plastics are most often than not used in lighting fires in order to burn out all the other types of waste. And then generally there's just a disconnect between citizenry or residents and environmentally sound waste management. That is to say that people just do anything or do what is convenient in order to get rid of their waste. And these wastes often end up in landfills or drainage systems, and it puts the whole place in a sort of a disarray when it comes to waste management. But luckily for us, Gaio and other CSOs in certain communities are doing a lot when it comes to sort of rectifying the situation. So first of all, in the project, in areas where we have projects in Edubiase, in Cape Coast, in Accra, we have established material recovery facilities and complementary buyback centers. What this means is that we've instituted an incentive-based system for waste collection. That is to say that if you have organic waste separated, if you have your plastic waste separated, if you have your e-waste separated, you get to, as it were, sell this waste to players in the waste value chain. You get to sell your organic waste to facilities that are doing urban composting or organic composting. You get to sell your plastic waste to organizations that are into plastic recycling. You get to sell your e-waste to organizations that are also into e-waste recycling. And so there is essentially an incentive-based system where people get to benefit financially from source segregating their waste and selling them to people who are interested in exploring recycling and circularity of waste. Another heavy thing that we've done in order to make sure that this model is effective is to do a lot of community sensitization. That is to say that we partner with local opinion leaders in the communities, and essentially we appoint them as zero waste ambassadors. These opinion leaders go into the communities and educate people on the need and importance of source point segregation of waste and how to turn your waste into resource, essentially fostering circularity and ensuring that the true waste hierarchy is adhered to. That is to say that people refuse plastics or items that are unrecyclable. They sort of reduce dependency on it and try as much as possible to recycle when needs be, as opposed to lumping up waste and sending them to landfills and all that. And one key thing I should say that has proven to be a success factor is the partnership that we have with local authorities. And so we have a decentralized system of governance in Ghana where local authorities like municipal and district levels, as well as metropolitan executives, have the autonomy to be able to implement waste management infrastructure in their local communities. And this has led to the setting up of ecological waste management committees at the various assemblies where we work. And essentially what this does is that it empowers the local community to be able to implement some of the zero waste. It empowers local communities to be able to implement some of the zero waste strategies that exist within the framework. And this has given rise to proper, or let me say, environmentally sound waste management in these communities. And so implementing zero waste projects essentially is the overarching aim. We're trying to get that into every community where we work. We've done it in Ghana, we are in Kenya, we are in Uganda, we are in Botswana, and gradually we're expanding to cover the entire African continent. But it starts with individual realizing that waste is one of the key issues that compounds the climate crisis. And so we need to do more when it comes to environmentally sound waste management. And that includes advocacy against false solutions to waste management, like incineration, like co-processing in cement kilns, like waste to energy systems, etc., etc. So those are some of the problems that are faced in rural communities, and those are some of the ways that CSOs like Gaio are helping in sort of managing the system and making sure that it works.
It's fantastic to hear from you, and I can hear the determination in your voice, and you're so you've got so many issues that you're dealing with. And what I always find really important about Ghana is the community, the opportunities for community involvement that you describe so well. And I wondered, I don't know if you had a chance to look through the report yet or how involved you were in it, but how will you be able to use this report? Is there anything about this report that will be helpful in working in that sort of strategized community space?
Yeah, precisely. I was not involved in working on the report, but I've had a very good look at the report. And to say that one of the things that we've taken from the report and one of the things that we're already implementing in Ghana is an advocacy for a shift from the regular systems that we have to the use and dispose systems to refill and reuse systems, because we see that that is one of the very key ways in shifting the date. Because essentially, and that is one of the projects that we're working on right now, the enterprise-driven solutions to plastic waste management. We're trying to decouple people from the idea that single-use plastics have come to stay. Because in Ghana, for example, 20, 30 years ago, there was really not a lot of dependency on single-use plastics. But these days, the problem has become so rife. And so advocacy, by integrating the data, the facts from research, like the Overshoot report, is something that is very key in trying to shift this day. Essentially, when people decouple themselves from the use of single-use plastics, then we can shift to more sustainable ways, and we can keep pushing the dates further and further. And hopefully in a few years to come, through the amazing work that all of us are going to be doing and have been doing already, we can have a situation where our global capacity to manage the waste far exceeds the plastic that we produce globally, and that would be very helpful. And in that regard, we've been supporting the local National Plastic Action Partnership on plastic waste initiative by the World Economic Forum, and also supporting Ghana's negotiating team at the Global Plastics Treaty. And so far, 2 sessions yet. We're hopeful of attending the 3rd session as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Okay, we're going to zoom into some questions. We've got like 8 minutes left. Thank you to Sharona, who's left for Shabbats, by the way, and anyone else who's leaving. Thank you so much for joining us. Right, let's dive in here. So we have a question from Enrique. Completely agree. We need personal action and communities on our side. However, if there was, so my computer's doing something weird here. If there was an outright ban on things, hang on a second, would that have adverse consequences? I'm paraphrasing because my computer's being strange, but I think it's a question about, oh yeah, if we have bans and plastic reduction policies across countries, could this generate such a crisis due to production costs rising, blah, blah, blah? General public and those communities would then be left in a sort of crisis situation. What would be a way forward that also addresses the urgency of dealing with plastic pollution? Is it this fear which is dampening progress? I would like to come to John and see if you can speak to that from a sort of global plastic treaty point of view.
I mean, I think it is very important to recognize that all products, materials around the world have an impact, have a footprint. And, you know, obviously we're very focused on plastic because we know it has a significant environmental footprint, but it doesn't mean that paper or glass or any other particular packaging material is without impact. And so, you know, I think when you're trying to figure out what the best approach is, we need to understand which approach has the lowest environmental footprint. And I think, you know, in some cases, it is quite clear that we can actually do without. There are things that we consider kind of unnecessary and the planet can live without. And I think pretty much all of us can probably walk into a local shopping center and identify 10 within the first 5 minutes of walking around. But there are others where, you know, we do need some form of packaging. And in some cases, plastic might be the best. It might have certain properties which are irreplaceable. We can't find another way of doing it. So we don't want to ban those ones. But we need to make sure then that those plastics are, you know, ideally we can use a reusable or a refill system, or in a kind of worst case scenario that they are recyclable or compostable. So I think, you know, we've got to avoid pitching it as a kind of a black and white discussion in the way that, you know, it's going to have these massive impacts. Yes, they will all have impacts, but we also have to recognize that there was something before plastic came about. You know, we had glass milk bottles, and we're not going to create a vacuum where there will be nothing. We just have to make sure that what we are incentivizing is actually thought through and is the best alternative, rather than you know, making a knee-jerk reaction and banning everything or telling everyone to shift in a direction which doesn't actually result in a better outcome.
Yeah, we're sort of talking about trust as well, aren't we? We're sort of talking about trust in the process and the extent of the learning and the data, I guess, as well. And that's why we spoke a little bit at the start about how this report doesn't sort of shame, and it's not particularly sort of like no plastic ever. You know, it's a very measured, data-driven report, which I think is very important. Okay, Sarah, I'm going to come to you. There are obviously a few questions coming in that you're best placed to answer. Anya asks, are additives and chemicals included? They can sometimes be a big chunk of the final product. So are they included in your workings
Absolutely. Out? We have for each country the detail of microplastics as well as additives. In fact, additives can be up to 6% of the plastic weight, so it's no small number, and actually many of them include chemicals of concerns. So we have also actually done the calculation of, out of the mismanaged plastic, how much of that is additives, because this is really substance that you don't want to have end up in nature, in waterways, etc.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple of, I see you've been answering questions in the chat, which is very helpful. So just for the benefit of the whole audience, fashion is not included yet, but you hope to include it. And somebody else asked if agriculture plastics, because we know there's a lot of those, are they included?
So those that are short life plastic and a part of the agricultural one is indeed into the report. There are some that are more industrial plastics, in which case those are not. So we really have focused on the plastics that have a lifetime of less than a year. So the single-use plastic and the packaging.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. So Nina, thank you for inputting on the chat. I think this was to Icha's point really about the project coming to an end and how we can react to that. So there is a link there to the International Waste Platform. Consumers can drive change. We can contact brand owners. We can demand change. Let me just see. Jacob, there was a question for you. Do you know how much quantity of waste lands in Ghana by country, by category? Do you have these numbers? Maybe they're in the report.
They are in the report. Actually, there's one page per country with all of the detail of what is used per capita, what is leaking, what is imported, exported, etc. So I invite everyone to actually dig into their own country and the others, because there's loads of really interesting data. Myself, I actually had quite some fun in reading some of them.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to come to you, Joe, because a couple of people are making the point that you just shouldn't buy what you don't need in plastic. And we've also had questions about how can individuals make a difference and what should their response be? Should that just be their response?
What not to buy? Well, I think
for
all of us, I think there's definitely an aspect of being mindful of how we consume. 100%. I would always recommend to everyone to think about what you buy. Where is it sourced from? Do you need it? Could you buy it secondhand? So all of those are 100% factors that we all have a responsibility to consider and to think about. But at the same time, the system is not set up for it to be convenient for us to do that. Convenient or affordable is the other aspect. So I think, yes, we as consumers definitely can make changes and can shift our behaviors and the things that we buy to an extent, but at the same time, we need the system to change. We need to phase out our disposable culture, where it is completely the norm to use something for just a few seconds at times and throw it away. That's what we need to be addressing and phasing out by replacing that with circular systems, with reuse systems, where we value our resources and keep them within a system. So definitely, I think there's a bit of both. We can all improve and we can all do things to make more sustainable choices, but at the same time, we need the system to change. It is not on us as individuals. Business and government need to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. Very well said. Sarah, you're going to have the last word because this is your report, and then I will just close proceedings.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Well, maybe I want to start with thanking so much all of the speakers today and also the attendees. Thank you so much for joining and for being part of that. We are doing the Plastic Overshoot Day really to empower organizations and work in collaboration. So this is really a brilliant way of doing this. And I just want to bring maybe a last word around what plastic is also enabling and that we don't necessarily see. Basically, plastic has also enabled this overconsumption because it has made a lot of things way cheaper than they used to be. And so I know that in the plastic community, there's a tendency to look at plastic life cycle assessment and say, but this is actually what has the lowest emissions per packaging or per whatever. But the fact that it's enabling more of it to be consumed, to be bought, etc., kind of like goes like unbalances it. And this is something that we cannot show in a life cycle assessment. And I think that this is really one thing to link with this overconsumption and to think further and in terms more of system change also to kind of make the link with what Joe ended up saying.
Thank you. Controversially, I think life cycle analysis should be banned in this regard, and I would love it if this report managed to oust that. Can't say enough how brilliant I think this report is. Spend some time with it, have a look, use it for whatever you need to do. It's a massive resource. Make sure you follow Plastic Overshoot Day on social media as well. Let's keep this going, and you'll find the report, the long and the short version, because I know the long version is very long, plasticovershoot.earth. It will all be there. I just want to say thank you. What an honor to be able to host this. And thank you to our brilliant panelists. I can't tell you how much I learned in an hour. Okay, see you next time, and make sure that we keep this energy and we keep spreading the word about Plastic Overshoot Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lucy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.